Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first virtual edition of our SolarPower Summit. I'm Aurélie Beauvais, the Policy Director of SolarPower Europe, and I am delighted to be the host of today's sessions. Yesterday was already quite a fascinating experience for all of us with the intervention of Commissioner Kadri Simpson that committed to supporting us in bringing further the deployment of solar across EU member states. It went hand in hand very well with the release of our NECP assessment and the launch of SolarPower Europe's NECP map, which provides a comprehensive overview of the state of play when it comes to the achievements of the solar targets across EU member states. And indeed, one of the things we clearly see is that we could go much further. Yesterday was also concluded or initiated very nicely by Director General of the IEA, Fatih Birol, which gave us a preview of one of their upcoming report in October later this year, which actually forecasts that if Europe was to keep track on climate neutrality, solar would become Europe's prime energy source in the next 5 years in terms of installed capacity. So that is about time now to discuss about a solar industrial strategy, looking at the impressive place that actually solar will take in Europe's upcoming energy transition. And it is true that, so that will be the topic of our first session, industrial strategy. Because we see it as one of the missing links, basically, of the European Green Deal as we see it. However, looking at the European Green Deal, it has been stated from the very beginning, as early as February, by President-elect Ursula von der Leyen, that the European Green Deal would not only be a way to achieve an energy and climate transition, it would be the cradle of a new industrial revolution for Europe, based on clean energy technologies. Green and digital technologies have been identified as the cornerstones of this industrial revolution, but the question remains open as to what is the place of renewables in this overall picture and what is the place of solar. Talking about the notion of strategic value chains and to initiate a bit the debate, we wanted to share with you this first slide, which basically shows you the results of the 2050 study that we have developed together with the La Parenta University. That's the scenario which has been missing also in the current forecast at EU level, which is basically a 100% renewable scenario to achieving climate neutrality. And what you can see here is that in all scenarios, being the less ambitious on the laggard side or the more ambitious, the leadership side, solar is playing a key role in delivering Europe's energy transition. That is valid for electricity, that is valid for hydrogen production. So we do see that renewable and the renewable value chain really comes at the very beginning of the European Green Deal industrial revolution, which is why it has been about time to develop an industrial strategy and an industrial framework at European level to support manufacturing activities in the EU for renewables. And obviously, in order to achieve that, you need a work which is made both on the side of the industry and on the side of the governments. Looking at the industry, we have worked relentlessly to do our job. So maybe if you look at the second slide, one of the biggest developments which we had this year was the launch of the Solar Manufacturing Accelerator. So that is a platform that has been initiated by industry and organizations. So SolarPower Europe is proudly coordinating that with very distinguished partners such as ATPV, VDMA, IPVF, and ESMC. And we are working together in order to select pipelines of projects which can be successful in the EU. And we are working together to help them reach better maturity, single out the best performing ones. All of this is done basically to reach out to governments, policymakers, and financial investors. And this is where the regulatory framework and political support becomes extremely critical. And this is what we will be discussing today. And I'm very happy to be moderating this session about fostering Europe's solar industrial ecosystem. And to help us go through the very complex topic that is this one, I'm very happy to have on this panel Mr. Jürgen Reinhardt, which is the Chief Executive Officer of SMA Solar Technology, so one of the major equipment and inverter manufacturers we have in Europe. Roch Dodrowski-Strel, which is the CEO of IPVF, the French Technology Institute of Ile-de-France, and Stefan Degner, which is the Managing Director for First Solar, Vice President for the EMEA region, and also Vice President of SolarPower Europe. So I think we can start. We will be together for the next 40 minutes to shape the contours, basically, of what we would see as a successful industrial strategy for solar. But of course, success also comes with a very thorough assessment of where we are at. And it really starts with timing. And the big question, is the timing right? And now I'm looking at you, Roch, in the first place, because you were also one of the key initiators of a coalition that was released, well, not so long ago, the Solar Europe Now coalition, with more than 160 players calling for a robust industrial strategy in Europe. So, Roch, actually, why now?
Thanks very much, Aurélie. Indeed. Let me share three of the key messages that were come out from that call to action called Solar Europe Now. So, as you know, the European Commission, we just looked at 2050 figures, and the study you presented is quite clear. When we look at the impact of this 55% greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030, there's a study released by the Joint Research Center in March 2020 that looks specifically at the role of PV based on scenario from the long-term strategy. According to that study, reaching a 55% of greenhouse gas emission by 2030 requires a PV capacity in the EU surge to 450 to 600 gigawatts, depending on the policy scenario, which implies an annual growth rate of 12 to 15% in the 2020-2030 timeframe to increase our annual market from approximately 16 gigawatt in 2019 to 50 to 80 gigawatt in 2030. So this is basically time 3 or time 5. So why now? Three very rapidly key arguments relying upon that European ambition and its consequences on our energy system. First, an economic one, very short term. Economies, as you know, of scale are critical when it comes to manufacturing. And recent studies from Fraunhofer and VDMA show that European-based manufacturing would be competitive with global PV factories should an annual production volume between 5 and 10 gigawatt be reached. Such a dynamic market provides the basis for creating more than 100,000 jobs along the solar PV value chain. Second argument, a strategic one linked with regional security of supply. The projected massive increase of installation should be linked to manufacturing schemes, bringing balance to worldwide production capacity, ensuring supply and avoiding disruptions. The current production capacities, as a reminder, for wafers, solar cells, and modules in EU are less than 2 gigawatt, less than 1 gigawatt, and around 6 gigawatt, respectively. And finally, a strategic one linked with technology. As the module mainstream technologies are progressively getting at the maximum efficiency of around 25%, the theory limit is set to 29%. We see the industry looking ahead at tandem technology. In this emergence of solar PV material, new generations, European historical R&D skills are major assets to support a sustainable and competitive mastership of technology in our continent. So that's just three arguments answering why now.
Thank you, Roch. So I also take the two big pillars, which are basically the significant growth of our domestic market, the strong pipeline of demand, and the strong assets which we have in R&D. You mentioned that we had only 2 gigawatts of production when it comes to module today in the EU. In terms of share, what do you think? Because if you start with numbers in this regard, what do you think would be a decent share in order to say we are reliant, we are resilient?
As you say, as mentioned by the Fraunhofer VDMA studies, I mean, economies of scale are critical. So I believe we need to have, there are two key factors here. Reaching a European-based capacity rapidly of 5 to 10 gigawatt is key on one hand, and be able to link R&D with manufacturing is key on the other.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rock. Looking at you, Stefan and Jürgen, I mean, is this basically constatation shared amongst you by your companies, by your business development units? Do you see the EU as becoming a more attractive market as well for manufacturing? Maybe, Stefan, you would like to start?
Yeah, thank you very much, Aurélie, and good morning to everybody. Yeah, so I think there's no doubt in what Rock was sharing that we are on this growth trajectory, and we will see a market of 20 to 30 gigawatts for the next 5 to 10 years for sure, being between public tenders, corporate demand, which is increasing and accelerating this trajectory, and then of course C&I and residentials. And in 8 to 10 years, we will see renewable hydrogen also being a new source of demand for solar PV. So this is pretty clear that solar PV is becoming an important economic factor and will support an industrial ecosystem in Europe. However, on the other side, the pandemic has shown that multiple industries have underscored the importance of supply chain diversity. And we, as a US-based company and the only alternative to crystalline silicon among the 10 largest manufacturers in the world, can provide this supply chain diversity and enable a market to reduce the over-reliance of imported product from China. So we remain very supportive and can provide an alternative, an innovative alternative to enhance the supply chain security in Europe and help Europe meeting the clean energy objectives we all have. And as First Solar is evaluating future capacity expansion regularly, we may seek to diversify from our current manufacturing sites in the US, in Malaysia, and Vietnam. We haven't made any decisions at this point, but the factors which are going into our evaluation are first and foremost geographic proximity to the solar demand, where our company has an energy or competitive advantage. The ability to export cost competitively into other markets is another important factor to be considered, while we look at cost competitive labor, low cost energy, very important point, and low cost real estate, of course. And finally, what's important, and I think that this is what the Manufacturing Accelerator is also looking for, we have to have a cost competitive supply chain in order to source locally and reduce the overall carbon footprint of the manufacturing.
Thank you, Stefan. So interesting as well to see that, so let's say the domestic growth as well that we see in the solar market in Europe is also motivation for, well, I like the term diversification, because we do know this expression that says basically don't put your eggs in the same basket. And so that's also an interesting perspective to see that another way as well to strengthen the resilience of the European solar value chain is to combine also working with our local value chain together with diversifying the amount of suppliers. And I note that you are looking more closely into the European market for potentially establishing manufacturing capacities, but we're not there yet. So I'm happy to discuss the why at a later stage. Jürgen, do you agree as well? What is your assessment today of the market prospects that we have for manufacturing in the EU?
Yes, I fully agree. First of all, thank you, Aurélie, and good morning to everybody. But I fully agree with the numbers we've mentioned, and Rock also went into again, so that fully correlates to our market intelligence. But back to the question, I would say the timing could not be better actually for a European fresh restart. If we look at it from a big perspective, then of course 10 to 25 years ago, so roughly from 95 to 2010, Europe was the stronghold of solar industry. With Italy, with Spain, with Germany and other countries really being very, very strong. Prices were too high, but a lot of systems were taken into operation. Then we actually had nearly 10 years of really heavily declining prices, which is good for the industry, which is good for the customers. But we are now entering a time, I think, where we need to think much more about sustainability. So we have come to a fact where solar energy is the cheapest form of electricity generation. And now we need to look at different factors. And that is definitely things like, of course, quality, definitely lifetime. And there's a big difference between quality and lifetime. I could go into that if requested. But especially also that we look at the circular economy and look at the total lifetime of the products, the circular economy, the reusing of the material, etc., eco-label, and all those items that are very, very important for a sustainable industry in the long run. And as Rock also mentioned, of course, we have very, very good R&D skills in Europe. We have very much knowledge. We have experience. We are now having 10,000s of jobs in Europe, and it can be 100,000. There's no doubt about it. And we actually took the decision nearly 2 years ago that we really close our R&D and production manufacturing in China, sold that, and took everything here, and it was a good decision. We see good growth. We know that our customers really like that step. We have been successful in that, and nowadays we are more than 2,000 people here in Germany. And having R&D and operations and quality and sustainability thoughts very, very close together and close to the customer. And Europe is a very important market for the PV industry. There's no doubt about it.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Jürgen. You have mentioned a lot of elements on which we will come back at a later stage. So indeed, how can we single out a bit the European solar industry? So you mentioned sustainability, circular economy. We're going to have a closer look at this. But I would like maybe to transition to one of the last points you made, because we discussed timing, which is absolutely critical. Now we need to look at each other's bellies as an industry and as a market, basically, the European Union, the business environment that we provide. And so I would like to question you three on how you see our business environment, and do we actually provide a competitive offer to our manufacturing industries compared to other regions, which might be more supportive or less supportive. So Jürgen, for example, you said that you have been relocating your R&D activities from Asia to Europe, maybe starting with it, and then you can expand on the overall business. But was it easy? Was it actually better, or did you encounter other challenges that you might not have been expecting?
I mean, yes, your question was actually, are we competitive? And I would say definitely so. Of course, there is something that if you would purely look at price capex, meaning the price of an inverter, for example, if I speak, of course, then from inverter perspective, then you could be cheaper doing it in a low-cost country. But if we look at the competitiveness that comes beyond that, then we need to look at the 3 big Ds. So it's, of course, decentralization, thereby decarbonisation of the PV industry, and digitalization. And it is so that we do see this trend towards decentralization with PV, of course. We get the decarbonisation by that. And especially the digitalization, of course, gives us the possibility to really do correct sector coupling, integrate PV charging, integrate all the grid requirements in a good way, have a very, very high security of the whole system, etc. And all of these things are actually easier if you work very close in the European context. So yes, there is a disadvantage, and that might really be the last 2-3% on cost. But that's the capex part. If you look at the total lifetime, then I think the European manufacturers on the inverter side, I'm not only talking for SMA, I could take Fronius or somebody else as well, is actually having much higher focus on really the lifetime. We design the products really for 20 years and not for 5 years. Quality is one thing. Lifetime, you need to put design reserves into your equipment in order to really withstand the long life needed out in the sun or in the rain. And in the end, that is helping the customer. So it's 2 issues. The one is the digitalization and really being able to do sector coupling in supermarkets, in charging for electric vehicles and wholesalers, and the other part is really making sure you get this knowledge together at one side and making the best for the customer due to the fact that he has a longer lifetime and support for the product.
Okay, interesting. So basically talking about, let's say, the internal competitiveness of the solar industry itself, you would see indeed, so digitalization and kind of the complexification of the services that we provide as a driver for singling out our competitive edge, sustainability and localization of the industrialization. So also bringing all the production hubs closer to achieve further economies of scale and being closer to the consumer are interesting elements. All right, thank you, Jürgen. Maybe looking at the regulatory environment, because of course we need to combine our own internal competitiveness with the support that we get in terms of enabling framework. So maybe Roch and Stefan, how do you see the business environment that we provide in Europe? Is it easy to do business, taking the solar industry as any other industry? How would you reflect on the competitive offer that we provide in this field? Maybe if that's okay, I would like to start with Stefan. Maybe if you want to provide a bit, because you're in charge of business development across quite a lot of regions, including Africa and Asia. So maybe you can tell us a bit about that. How do you see Europe versus other regions of the world in this regard?
Yeah, thank you, Aurélie, for the question. So first and foremost, I think it's important that the market is supported by a stable and reliable regulation. I think we are on a good pathway to that, but we are still not there. And looking back, Europe hasn't been great in this. What we have seen that retroactive measures in Spain are now being discussed in France on operating portfolios are eroding the trust in the market, and of course into investors who want to scale up in such markets. So I fully agree with what Jürgen said on the decentralization and getting closer to the customers. We have to see that today the transportation costs from Asia into Europe account for more than 10% of the module price for the customer. It's accounting for more than 20 kilowatts of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt peak installed. So this is an important factor to be considered, and which is supporting the decision for being close to the demand and getting to building up manufacturing at the scale we need. We discussed this before. We need large scale in order to bring down the cost. Looking quickly back on the capex, of course it's not the only one, but it's an important one, and as well as operating costs. So capex is basically the same everywhere when it comes to the machinery. However, land access, land availability is an important thing. On the operating side, we are looking at the electricity price, which is heavily burdened in many European member states with levies, with surcharges, with taxes. And if we could get to a system where I just contract the electricity price and just contract the transport through the grid, as many other industries already do, then this could be a heavy step forward to support that. We see that we have still a lot of differences in tax schemes across Europe and also compared to international markets. Many international countries are offering tax holidays for the first couple of years to new investors. So this is something where Europe might think of. And then the most important factor for me, and this is where I still see the largest gap, is affordable financing, debt financing for these investors. So the EU Commission has called the EIB being the enabler of the Green Deal. However, when you talk to the EIB, they tell you, yeah, we are happy to fund the operating projects or the projects which are being built, but we are not ready to fund an investment into manufacturing. So I think this is where we need much more alignment, where we need a more holistic view to support the entire solar ecosystem and provide long-term cheap financing to manufacturers who are interested in investing into Europe. So yeah, I think that covers most of where I see room for improvement from Europe against international locations.
Thank you, Stefan. So that's less bad than I was expecting. Maybe I'm too focused on the EU frame, but I think it's already good to hear that, at least regulatory-wise, and I think it's true. We can subscribe to that at least we have a stable regulatory framework and ambitious targets, which have undoubtedly supported the growth in the market and probably contributed to reignite the spark within the solar manufacturing ecosystem here in Europe. I do hear that we could do better when it comes to providing incentives, notably looking at tax incentives, that electricity prices are becoming a key issue. And I think that is something very general when it comes as well to industry, and maybe, yeah, we could do better in terms of enabling framework. Rock, do you have anything you would like to add to this, and maybe also on the perspective of the innovation ecosystem?
Exactly. Just a word on the R&D, from the R&D and innovation viewpoint. So I believe that the strategic starting point pushed by customer expectation, as well as mentioned by Jürgen and Stefan, is the Made in Europe. Is that the Made in Europe ambition has to come first. This is really something that we need to make vocal and clearly communicate on that. Once this is granted, and when it comes to innovation and R&D from an operational viewpoint, there's perhaps three aspects I'd like to mention here. First, it is crucial to develop regional cooperation. It really behooves the European authority to foster that cooperation on the continent. And this is, I think, going in the right direction, thanks namely to the Horizon Europe content, which is clearly aligned with that target. Second, the solar PV market, its technologies, its application, its innovation is going so fast that is extremely important for relevant and differentiating R&D and innovation to build extremely strong cooperation between manufacturing and R&D. Innovation, specifically in the solar PV field, has to be geared towards industry products impact. It's very important not only to build leadership at one point in time, but as well to build a system which makes this leadership recurrent, to make sure that this leadership is regularly reaffirmed. And finally, as space is of the essence, it's very important. We mentioned that the timing is perfect. It's important to rapidly trigger this support that Stefan just presented, including as well the R&D. So from our perspective, important projects of common European interest could be a good vehicle for that. It's an ambitious vehicle, and if triggered, it has to be triggered rapidly. So pace is of the essence, timing is of the essence here.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Rock. I think it transitions nicely, and you have already dropped quite a lot of elements for me to take upon when it comes to how can actually the EU solar industry itself make a difference. So what are the specificities that we see could encourage further local manufacturing? So sustainability has been mentioned, quality, and in general, yes, the need, as you said, Rock, maybe to look at how we can favor the made in Europe, which is not necessarily European, but made in EU, to encourage the relocalization of our productive capacities. You are right to say that timing is of the essence. So we need to act fast. But at the same time, and I think that's a question I would have to all of you at the end of the day, policymakers are also looking at us because they want affordable transition. And we know that as a solar sector, a solar industry, we are already having to compete with fossil fuels, with other energy sources. And so we have achieved to become the most competitive renewable technology. That has been a great achievement, and we see the growth coming. But can we combine pursuing this trend, which is necessary to achieve climate neutrality, with already reshifting towards adding maybe additional requirements related to CO2 footprint or quality? Is that compatible from your perspective, and how do you make it work? Who would like to start? Jürgen, maybe?
Yeah, I can start. I think that is a very valid question, and normally the people would expect an answer to it's not compatible, but I think it's definitely compatible. Just to give you an example, we are measuring in our CSR approaches we are measuring really a lot of things like customer dedication, of course, is a part of it, of sustainability, really having reoccurring customers, etc., recoming revenues from the customers. But also, of course, for example, we are measuring the amount of energy we use per kilowatt of inverter power we produce. And it has gone down 60% over the last 4 years for us, for example. And even the circular economy of reusing material, of stripping an inverter once it's at the end of the lifetime back into its bare parts, into steel, aluminium, PC boards, etc., and then getting that into the circular economy is actually paying off. So it's not so that it's only a duty for us costing a lot of money. It's actually paying off if you do that correctly. So I do think that sustainability and economic or commercial success actually go hand in hand. It's not a controversial discussion. It's actually going hand in hand if you do it correctly. And actually the module industry, so Stefan and the other guys have come further than the inverter industry in this regard. But I think there's a lot to do on the battery side and on the PV inverter side still, and that's why we're engaging so much into really getting economic benefit, while at the same time really making sure we do have a much more sustainable approach in applying circular economy and being a citizen that is taking care of the environment, not only in production but in the entire circle.
Thank you, Jürgen. Stefan, Rock, you would like to add to this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, from my point of view, there's absolutely no way around the sustainability questions. Yeah, if we are increasing the base of solar power generation by tenfold or whatever the number is over the next 5 to 10 years, it's very important to focus on that, to make sure that Europe is leveraging its leading position and what has been announced with the Green Deal, and taking that forward and demanding for low carbon initiatives and setting the environmental performance standards. We have the work on the eco design, eco label, green public procurement, and energy label going on, and following what under the NSF 457 objective has been recently implemented with the EPEAT label as being an eco label in the US. So this is super important to do that, and we have a good example in France, which has already introduced a carbon footprint criteria into their tenders. This has recently been adopted by South Korea. So why shouldn't other European member states not also apply this? Or we ideally we have a system which is relevant for all the EU, or ideally all Europe. And Europe has been a leader and a standard setter in regards to circular economy, to recycling, to other things which are being adopted globally. So let's use this ideas in order, and this drive and this mindset in order to create a sustainable environment with high entry hurdles. This is absolutely important in order to ensure that everybody is striving for that. And at the end, this will result also in what Jürgen mentioned, better quality, but support operational lifetimes of PV projects for 40 years and longer. I see customers designing financial models and making their investment decisions based on a 40-year operating lifetime. So only a sustainable product and a sustainable power plant can support that, with at the end generating ultra clean solar electricity. And that's what we all need to strive for and need to support.
Thank you, Stefan. You mentioned indeed the French framework, which is one that everyone has been looking into also in the past years, indeed with the introduction of this CO2 criteria. So Rock, maybe two questions for you related to, so one related to the discussion we just had. So because I know that at EPVF you also have concrete recommendations or proposals to bring forward the industrial strategy, solar industrial strategy at EU level. So I would love to hear those. And maybe at the same time, a question for you on what we call cutting edge technology. So in the accelerator, we've seen that we do have a lot of disruptive innovation going on, other technologies that might still play on the sustainable bit, but remain more expensive. And so how do you scale up these without impacting too much this other KPI, which I was mentioning, which is to keep the transition affordable?
Thanks very much, Aurélie. First of all, let me say how much I agree with Stefan and Jürgen viewpoints on the fact that eco-design is key. It's a strong customer expectation, and this is really preparing products that are vocal, performing well on the market is really going through that door. And this is at the core of the research programs we have designed here at IPVF. Just a word on what is the thinking in France. There's a specific working group looking at indeed how to help support Europe championing the energy transition. In the very shortly in the arena of solar PV, the key messages is substantial financing to support industry and R&D rapidly set up. This is one. Secondly is being clear when it comes to local content and carbon content, as was just mentioned. This indeed is a best practice in France that we see positively. We recommend to other member states as well. And finally, fair trade measures are key. So basically, the capacity of Europe to see how international cooperation unravels, make sure that reciprocity is at the heart of the international trade, and that this is very closely assessed and reassessed regularly to make sure that this is there's a balanced cooperation that is unraveling at global scale. When it comes to breakthrough technologies, to answer that part of the question, as said, eco-design and the raw materials, the rare materials are key to it's built in our research program at IPVF. What we are looking at is where industry looks at, which is basically the emergence of tandem technologies as a next generation of solar PV materials, which allow to capitalize on the industry learning, both in terms of cost and technology. So basically, it's the idea of adding an additional layer to existing technologies and enhancing the cost and performance criteria. We look at two things, and I will not elaborate on that: perovskite on silicon technology and 3,5 on silicon technology. Simply, we specialize in the upper layer, the perovskite and 3,5 materials, which could be this additional layer added to bottom cells, and the interfaces. We have a strong leadership in interfaces design. So basically, how do you build that sandwich between different layers? So again, this is really an initiative that is discussed with the industrial partners that we have at IPVF, with the academic partners that we have at the IPVF, and looking at how to best build upon the industry learnings and how to best put on the market as quickly as possible the next generation of solar PV materials.
At competitive costs.
Of course.
Yes. All right. So maybe coming back to the points we just discussed. I mean, I'd like to dig a bit deeper. You mentioned reciprocity. At the same time, we have seen that the trade measures that were in place back in the time in Europe did not really succeed as we see it to actually support the industry. On the contrary, the effects were more contraction effect as well on the deployment of solar capacity. So we are coming back from there, and basically we're trying to look at a win-win strategy where our market develops, we have higher sustainability criteria, and at the same time we ensure reciprocity, which is obviously very important. You have all mentioned eco-design, but eco-design, as we see it, will not really kick in before 2023 when it comes to the European level, which means we can even look further, maybe to 2024. It's in 4 years' time. Maybe it's a bit too late. So what could we be looking at in the meantime? And do we look at local content or CO2 content? And what does a local content mean in a market with 27 different energy mixes? Stefan, would you like to start, maybe?
Yeah, happy to take that question. So, local content hasn't been shown as the great solution in other markets. Yeah, many markets have tried that to combine kind of a tender award with an award to support local manufacturing. It hasn't played out really well. So I think the focus on the sustainability criteria is much more important in order to support the market, to support the generation of what I said earlier, the ultra clean solar electricity kilowatt hour. The EU Commission has recently released this white paper on foreign subsidies, to analyze and to consult with the industry and other stakeholders on how to design that. And that has a couple of good parts which need much deeper evaluation and discussion when it comes to the trade itself, and being more precise on the qualification what a foreign subsidy really is. But I think this goes into the right direction. On the other hand, the same paper deals with the positioning of an EU investor versus an outside investor, where an EU actor automatically can make a decision without being exposed to any investigation, while any outside investor would be. So this is also something which should be kind of streamlined and discussed deeper, how we can find this kind of level playing field, which at the end is needed and required to support the investment decision for setting up manufacturing in Europe along the value chain.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting point you're bringing here, Stefan, indeed, because indeed there was this paper on foreign subsidies, and maybe that's the way to look at international diplomacy and Green Deal diplomacy to ensure that we do have this level playing field. And indeed, when we look at foreign subsidies, one question is a bit, would the Green Deal be associated as an unfair subsidy, for example, by other regions of the world, which may not have the same program in place, for example, in order to support green and digital technology. So that's a fair point. And so you also said that maybe looking at sustainability and encouraging best performers overall in EU or outside of the EU could be the best way to guarantee at the same time a diversified and cost-efficient value chain, and on the other hand, obviously, still value local production. Rock, Jürgen, what are your views on this?
Yeah, maybe to not to repeat everything Rock and Stefan has said, I would think you're right, Aurélie, that there is still some time, unfortunately, until we have a decent eco label, probably 23, 24, maybe even later. I think, though, it's very important that it has high hurdles. It shall not be an eco label which is easy to achieve, and then we have a greenwashing of the entire industry, which would not help anybody. It needs to have high hurdles, and I would love to see it with unannounced audits of an independent body to really make sure it's not only done in the type testing, but also in the serial testing. So it's continuously followed up, etc. So these are the things I would like to add on that front. When it comes to one topic, I think we did not touch so much is actually training. I think the European Union can do more, and we as companies can do more on really doing training for all the 27 states, because not all 27 states of the EU are on the same level, and there's much more to be done in order to foster training of how to transition from coal to renewable energies, how to train the people of actually taking that step in their job from conventional energy production towards renewable energy production. So that is an issue, I think, where the EU and the companies themselves can do a better part. And then the last, you also asked about technology and do we have a cutting edge? I would say when it comes to the inverters, it's the hardware is rather there where it is. Of course, going into silicon carbide, etc., on the semiconductors is doable and is done by us and others. But I think it's much more on an agile approach, because in a digitalized world where you actually try to do the sector coupling fully, you are entering a process where you don't know what you do not know. You do not know what the customer will really want. And thereby you need to take an agile approach. And that is much easier if you work closely with universities in Europe and with your own teams in Europe than if you try to do that over many continents. So definitely with partners, as Horizon also is fostering, but it is easier in Europe and in the own company, of course, than if you try to do that across the entire globe.
Thank you, Jürgen. Rock?
Not much to add really on that point. Simply, I think the environmental criteria indeed comes first. When it comes to local content, it has to be looked at closely related to the fair trade, the topic we tackled already, and look at, for instance, how we could recognize the EU-based added value or that kind of aspects. But this is really an open discussion.
Yes, that might be needed if we want to pursue with the integration of the internal energy market. That's definitely something that we're going to have to look at, sustainability from a European perspective. We are getting close to an end, unfortunately, but maybe I will ask you to tell us very shortly if you had a wish list, maybe one wish for the European Commissioner Breton, for example, for industrial strategy. What do we need in the first place, from your perspective, to really boost this solar industrial ecosystem in the next years? Maybe so. I know it's difficult, bluntly like that, but Stefan, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. So the most important wish is putting words into action. A lot has been discussed around the Green Deal, around the green recovery plans. Yeah. So now making it tangible and putting actions forward, and that around what we discussed. I think we all agree sustainability, CO2 focus would be the most important thing to put Europe in a position to take a lead on the global net zero trajectory.
Thank you, Stefan. Rock?
Yes, it's really recommendation, but I guess this is already done. But really connecting the dots between the global strategy, which is 55% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030, job creation, Green Deal, R&D strength in Europe. So really connecting the dots in order to have a very short-term impact, and basically to make sure that the message and implementation of the long-term strategy of the European Commission really boils down to very aligned, very coherent content of IPCE, of Horizon Europe, and any adjustment that will be made at EU level.
Yeah. So basically, to put actions into work, we need an industrial program for solar. Yes, we do. Jürgen, the last word is on you.
Thank you. Without repeating what has been said, my word would probably be reducing bureaucracy. I have an own system at home, of course, with PV on the roof, storage in the basement, electric car, and I can tell you in Germany, it's very big bureaucracy to get everything organized, to get everything into the right systems. I know it's the same, different bureaucracy in different countries. So I would very much wish that we, first of all, reduce on bureaucracy and then also harmonize across Europe, because that would make it much easier for the customer. And in the end, it's the customer who will thrive and foster PV industry.
Thank you very much, Jürgen, and thank you to all of you, Rock, Stefan, for this very interesting session. I hope our participants have enjoyed it. I think that the message is quite clear here. We have an impressive market growth. We have great prospects ahead of us. The Green Deal is a great vehicle for supporting a solar industrial strategy, but we need to put our words into concrete actions. We need a robust industrial strategy for solar. We need to support access to finance, projects, access to land, and we need to think of what singles us out and at the same time helps us diversify our value chain while keeping sustainability performance as the very core priority. And so that is something that we will work on together as SolarPower Europe and within the frame of the Solar Manufacturing Accelerator. Thanks a lot. I will speak to you very soon, I guess, and to the audience, stay tuned. So far, we will have a short break, and then the next session will be about sustainable finance. As you saw, access to capital was also very important when it comes to the solar industrial revolution, and our colleague Marcela Bordena will walk you through it in the next session. Thank you very much, and I will see you very soon.
Thank you.